All right, so it seems like we've got a few more people in our audience, so I'll go ahead and introduce what's happening. Thank you everyone for joining our elementary scientist chats. Today we are going to be hearing from Stefania Briones about bats. Stefania is a research associate who works at the Field Museum in our collection with a lot of really cool specimens, skulls, and skins from bats and awesome animals. Oh, and we did just get a message in the chat that maybe some people are having a hard time finding it. We do have 15 people watching it, so it should be functional. But I'll just give a second to make sure people can find it, because we are trying new things all the time in our ever-continuing journey of virtual engagement in the museum. All right, I'm gonna send this link out. Bats and YouTube and bats. They're very important. All right, I'm gonna share out this link to our friends. I'm sure everybody has had many adventures with technology during this time.
No doubt.
No doubt. I'm sure the bats are no exception.
I would think so.
I mean, maybe not like using Zoom, but, you know, navigating wind turbines. I feel like they're dealing with some other challenges. All right. I do think that things are increasingly functioning because we have even more people watching. Thank you, everybody, for watching and observing our thrilling sharing of links and struggles to mute screens so we do not have terrifying sound loops that nobody wants. Okay. But I think now we are maybe ready, super ready to talk about bats with Stefania, a wizard of bats or a researcher of bats. But I think that's pretty magical personally. So I think it's a good enough time to go ahead and get started with your presentation and what you want to share with us today. Oh, sorry, I should have more things. People, I know we've gotten guests questions from the audience, and we are so excited that you have sent in some questions. And we are going to address some of those questions in Stefania's presentation. She'll hit on some of those topics. I'll also ask some of them after the presentation, and anything we don't have time to get to today in our chat, we'll be able to send a follow-up email to answer some of your awesome questions, because it's always great to be curious, and we want to make sure we try to satisfy your curiosities. And now we can start our presentation.
Awesome. So thank you everybody for watching and for being here and for wanting to learn all sorts of things about bats. So let's get started. Can you guys see the screen? Cool. Awesome.
Looks good.
So we're going to talk about bats today and all the amazing things that make bats bats and how we can study them. So here's a little overview of what we're going to be looking at. So what are we going to learn today? We're going to learn some bat facts that I promise are super cool. What bats eat, where bats live, ecosystem services. We're going to look at some incredibly gorgeous and cute bat faces. And then I want to finish off dispelling some bat myths that you're probably familiar with, but then you can tell your friends everything that you learned today.
That's pretty important.
Pretty important, yeah. So let's get to know bats a little bit better. So what makes a bat a bat? Bats are mammals just like us. They give birth to live young. They have hair, they have placentas, and they breastfeed their young just like us. They are the only mammals that possess true flight. So I'm sure you've heard of flying squirrels, but actually they just glide. Bats are the only mammals that can take up in flight. So that's what makes them also super, super special. And they have echolocation. I'm sure you've heard that dolphins do this too, where they emit sounds that are going to bounce off of their surroundings. It'll come back to them, and then they can sort of discern what's going on around them, where their prey is, if there's anything in their path, where they have to fly off next, etc. Right? So also super cool. And the fact that they share this with other mammals like dolphins is also super cool.
They use echolocation kind of like an enhanced way of seeing. Like they can hear so well, it still tells them what is going on around them.
Exactly. They can hear the fluttering of a moth that's maybe not super close. So when they're hunting, they'll emit echolocation sounds. It'll bounce off of the moth, and then they'll come in and just swoop and eat it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So bats belong to the order Chiroptera, which means winged hand. So they've got like their own order within all of the mammal classification. And around the world, there are more than 1,400 species of bats. So that's
so many bats.
I know, right? It's a lot of species. And they are the second most diverse group of mammals. So number one is going to be rodents. So tiny mice, big mice. But bats are going to come in at a good second place.
So is the Ptera and Chiroptera like pterodactyls? They both mean wing?
It means hand.
Or hand. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. They have that same root there.
Yeah. So like I was telling you guys, there's two main groups, and we're going to have Merakiroptera, which is going to entail all of the old world bats, flying foxes. I'm sure you've seen them in nature documentaries where they have a huge wingspan of about a meter or more. And these are going to live mostly in Australia, Asia, Africa. They're not going to be on the American continent. And then we've got Microchiroptera, which are all of the micro bats. So those are going to be also all over the world, but they're the ones that we're going to find here. And you can also tell they have very different facial structures, which we'll get into in a little bit.
Those big bats in the United States. They're very cute though.
So let's look at some bat faces. And from there, we'll go on to talk about all of the other topics that actually revolve around what they look like. So these are a bunch of different microbats. These are all from Microchiroptera. And you can see that they have all sorts of different faces. Now, we would think that they all eat the same thing, but no, they all of these groups, all of these bats eat different things, which also contributes to their facial structure. For example, I don't know if you guys can see my pointer.
Yeah. I think the pointer comes through, so that's helpful.
This little tiny bat is a fruit-eating bat. It's gonna eat, well, not tiny fruits, but fruits, and it disperses seeds. So for example, it'll grab a little fruit and then fly, depending on the species, a bit farther away to eat the fruit. And in the process, it can drop the fruit, or it'll finish eating the fruit and then just drop the seeds, and it'll help in forest regeneration, which is super important after fires, for example. And then this guy right here, this guy eats insects, which is also super cool. Now, you would look at this one at the bottom and you would think, why does it have such an elongated snout? Why does it need to have such a long tongue as well? So these bats, they feed on nectar. So they'll go inside the flower and slurp up all of the nectar that's inside the flower. And in the process, it'll get covered in pollen, like all over, and it'll go visit flower to flower, and it'll disperse the pollen, helping the plant to reproduce, which is...
That's like similar to bees who also eat nectar and carry pollen from flower to flower.
Exactly, exactly. Now this guy up here, this is my favorite. This is one of my favorite bats. It's called the Bulldog Faced Bat. And I think you can tell why, but this specific bat eats fish, which I think is incredibly awesome.
How does it catch fish?
It's actually got really, really long claws, and it'll emit an echolocation sound. It'll bounce off of the fish in the water, and then it'll like kind of skim the water and use its claws to fish it out. So that's an incredible adaptation. Cool. Yeah. And then this guy down here, this guy also eats fruits, but you can tell that his face doesn't have any hair. So he's kind of like a rarity. In that sense, he does have a little pouch that he uses to cover his face, which I'm sure, you know, gets a lot of exposure, which isn't great because it doesn't have hair to protect it. And this guy also eats fruit. And the theory is that it'll bite into the fruit and all the juices will run down its face so that he can get like better access to those nutrients.
Like, and now the whole face is a juice funnel.
Yes.
A really
that's one of the theories.
A fun idea.
It's an amazing bat. Its wings. So if you look at the wing, it has these slits in the middle that make it look like an accordion. It's a gorgeous bat. It's one of my favorites too. That's actually my screensaver on my computer at work. And then this guy down here is the vampire bat. So I know when you hear about bats, you think, ooh, it's gonna want to suck my blood and things like that. And, you know, now that we're learning more about bats, you can say, yes, there are 3 species in the whole world out of the 1,400 species that feed on blood, which, if you think about it, is actually an amazing adaptation because not a lot of other mammals or other animals would think to conquer that part of nature.
Yeah. Where do vampire bats live?
You mean in the world or like?
Yeah, like in the world geographically.
Oh, in the new world. So it'll span from Mexico, I think, all the way down to South America.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So you won't find any of these in Illinois. But yeah, I mean, when you think about it, it's like, nobody else is doing this, and it has sort of an advantage. So I'm going to evolve to dominate this part of nature.
Yeah. And animals are like vampire bats are drinking blood. Does that like, you know, take out all of the animal's blood and they die when they're eating from them?
No. They don't want to kill the animal. They just want to like take advantage of the fact that the animal is there, but they're never gonna suck it dry.
Yeah, because they're also very small, and a lot of the animals they're probably eating from are much bigger.
Yes, like cows, horses, pigs. There's actually one species of blood feeding bat that only targets birds.
Oh, wow.
Super interesting. Yeah, so it'll eat blood from chickens, ducks, things like that. But this little guy right here, it's mostly mammal.
Okay. And when they're like, so it's kind of like these animals are just giving a blood donation in their sleep for food. They don't like get a snack or a sticker or any reward, but
basically. Something that's also really interesting is that these bats have a blood thinner in their saliva. So it helps the blood to run or to flow more easily. And so they can get like more of it and then leave quickly.
That's really cool. I think I heard that they're even like researching that for medical purposes too, for like strokes and blood clots.
Yes, definitely.
That's really cool.
So now that we've seen all of these cool bat faces, let's keep talking about what they eat. So you can see my little friend here, he's eating a little fruit and he's hanging from inside a palm tree, which is super helpful for the parent tree because it'll be really far away from its original place. Once the bat finishes eating this tiny fruit, he'll just drop the seed and he'll help with forest regeneration. So like we were talking about fruit, we've got also insect eating bats with that help with pest control. We've got nectar feeding bats that we saw in the last slide. The vertebrates, there are some bats that are carnivorous. So they'll eat birds, they'll eat lizards, like I have that little lizard there. They'll eat other bats.
Oh, wow.
Which is also, yeah, it's super, super cool. And like we mentioned and we've talked before, they also eat blood, but just 3 species out of the 1,400 plus. So you can imagine all of the other diversity that bats have when it comes to eating habits.
Yeah.
So another question that comes up a lot is, where do bats live? So there's a lot of places where they can live. They are very adaptable to conditions. They'll live in caves. So even within the depth of a cave, in certain sections, there will be one species of bat. And then further inside, there'll be another species of bat. So a lot of species can actually coexist within the same cave. Obviously, some caves get vandalized, so bats have to face that threat where their habitat is being destroyed, basically. They can also live in old buildings, abandoned mines. I've seen them in abandoned mines. The roofs of houses as well. They can live in trees. Let's say they can live in hollow trees, or they can just kind of hang on to branches and live there. And they can modify plants, which is why I included the little Honduran white bat here. It will bite the center vein of the plant. This is an heliconia. So that'll make the plant collapse, or the leaves collapse. And so they make like their own little tent. There are a group of bats that are called tent making bats. Some are primary, so they'll make the tent, and then some are secondary. They'll just be like, ooh, there's a tent already. I'll just, mosey up.
That's so fun.
Yeah, they are super cool. These little bats are also fruit-eating bats, so they help with forest regeneration, seed dispersal as well. And they are incredibly cute to look at.
Yeah. What is it that makes caves such a attractive home for bats? Why do bats like to live in caves?
Well, first, they're not going to be as disturbed as if they were outside in the open. There are lots of advantages to caves when it comes to pup care. So there will be huge colonies, and then certain females will go out, they'll look for food, and they'll come back, and there's like a nursery set up, and they can find their pup by their smell, by emitting certain noises or sounds. So caves really provide that big existing shelter for them. And also temperatures can vary among caves. So it'll be this really hot, humid area where they won't actually have to spend so much energy thermal regulating.
It's a pretty cool place to hang out. Really good.
Yeah, and it's also dark.
Yeah. Dark during the daytime. It's nice.
So we talked a little bit at the beginning about ecosystem services. We've been mentioning pollination. We also mentioned seed dispersal, but we haven't really talked a lot about pest control. So insect-eating bats actually help farmers a lot because they'll eat the pests that are going to bother, let's say, corn or tomatoes. So they also contribute a lot to the economy because that means farmers don't have to use so much pesticide. They don't have to take other measures in order to control these pests. And bats provide this service for us, which is super, super cool. I know we talked about seed dispersal and pollination. Bats help disperse seeds and pollinate things that we consume every day, every day.
Like, what are some of the plants that they are pollinating or dispersing seeds for?
So at least mostly in the tropics, because that's where we're going to find seed dispersing bats. They'll do guava, mangoes, ficus, species from the genus Ficus. And with pollination, they pollinate cacti, which is also beautiful to look at because these cacti produce these beautiful white flowers. And there's really cool videos of bats coming up to pollinate these, to consume the nectar, and in the way they'll pollinate it. But yeah, it's plants that we look at and consume every day. Also bananas.
Yeah. Oh, bananas are a good one. They're really important for plants. So they're helping them reproduce with pollination. They're helping them also spread their seeds with putting them out there. And then they're eating the bugs that might hurt plants. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, they also eat a ton of mosquitoes. So a group of bats can eat almost a ton of mosquitoes a night.
Wow.
Yeah, and nobody likes mosquitoes.
No.
And so these are some of the pictures referring to what we were talking about before. So here we've got, look at its tongue. It's super, super long for having such a tiny body. And it'll have these little hairs and kind of striations on the tongue, on the tip. So it expands and it sucks up all of the nectar that it can. And their tongues are so long that some actually go into their rib cage, which is also super cool. Here we've got a bat eating a scorpion. I'm not saying that scorpions are pests. Scorpions are incredibly, incredibly cool. But just to show you guys an example of what an insect eating bat looks like while it's eating an insect. So super cool. And then here we've got a fruit eating bat, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna take this fruit and I'm gonna go far away. So that'll obviously end up benefiting the plant in the long run and the bat. Okay, so let's talk about some myths about bats. I'm sure you've all heard the term or the phrase, ooh, you're blind as a bat, right? Well, it turns out bats are not blind. Bats can see just as well as any other mammal. They can see colors. They can differentiate shapes. Like imagine if you're flying at night, you're going to need to absorb all of the light that you can from your surroundings so that you can navigate, even when you're using echolocation. So let's say echolocation is like an upgrade to already having vision.
That is really good to know. I've definitely heard that a lot.
Oh yeah, you're as blind as a bat. And it's like, well,
it's rude.
You're telling me that I can see really well then.
And I have like an extra superpower to see even better.
Exactly. And so we saw also that bats eat all sorts of things. They can eat fruit, pollen, nectar, insects, other bats, birds, lizards, almost everything, fish. So when somebody comes and tells you, ooh, bats, ooh, they only eat blood. Now you guys can say, oh yes, only 3 species out of the 1,400 species of bats eat blood. So imagine all of the diversification of dietary, dietary groups that we have within bats. It's amazing. So again, dispelling the myth where they only want to drink your blood. No, they actually want to be your friends. They help us out a lot in maintaining ecosystem health, with, like I said, ecosystem regeneration, forest regeneration, and pest control.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of people sometimes get scared if bats are flying near them, but it's just like eating the bugs that are near us.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, that's a great thing.
Yes, nobody wants mosquitoes around them at any time. And so now I have a bonus for everyone. I'm going to show you guys some pictures from behind the scenes where we keep most of our bats and some of the bats that I've been working on. So this is how we would keep bats in the museum collection. They have their own special drawers and they're all classified within their species. So here we've got some flying foxes, and here we've got some little horseshoe bats from Kenya.
Do you know how many bats are like in the museum?
I don't know. I don't have an exact number, but
there's like thousands and thousands. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. So here, all of this hallway is just jars of bats.
Wow.
This is downstairs in the main collection in the fluid range. And then this is upstairs where we keep the things that we're working on the most or that we need, right now. And then this is just an example of how the skull ends up looking when we put it away.
It's really cool.
Oh, it's the best. And so here are some of the photo credits of all the pictures that I used. Members from the Bat Conservation Program of Guatemala. I used some of the pictures that Merlin Tuttle has taken, Bat Conservation International, and I also included some pictures that I took. So I am ready for your questions.
Right.
I hope you enjoyed the talk and that you have a newfound interest and love for bats.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that with us. We do have some really fun questions. One topic, we know a lot of bats are nocturnal, and there's a lot of questions about why bats are nocturnal and also how they wake up without an alarm clock.
Right, that's a really good question. So they're nocturnal because that way they don't have to compete with a lot of diurnal animals. So let's say lots of other mammals are awake during the day and they'll eat the fruits that I want to eat. So it'll be easier for me to kind of evolve into being a nighttime creature. So I won't have as much competition. Also, they can avoid more predators that way, which is also like key if you want to survive. And they don't need an alarm clock. Like let's say, oh, we wake up with the sun and then we go to sleep when the sun goes away. So bats, like any other animal, is going to have a circadian rhythm, which is a system that helps us regulate our sleep and tells us when we have to wake up. So let's say, oh, I know that I need to wake up at 6 p.m. like bats. So they know their circadian rhythm is going to help them achieve that. So they're like the other way around, let's say. They wake up with the moon.
Yeah. And Asher wanted to know, can bats be awake in the morning? And someone else also asked, do some bats ever sleep at night?
I do think some bats can sleep at night. Let's say if they stay behind taking care of pups. Some fruit-eating bats, like megabats, can also be awake during the day. They'll be grooming themselves or having interactions with other bats, but they won't necessarily go out and hunt and eat.
That makes sense. And we also had the question, what is the biggest bat on Earth?
That's going to be a megabat, one of the flying foxes. It can have a wingspan of more than a meter.
Wow.
Yeah. So they are huge bats.
That's like getting in the neighborhood of like my wingspan.
Oh yeah.
We also had questions about where bats can be found, which countries have bats, or which country also has the most bats.
So the country that has the most bats is actually a good question. Researchers, like what we're doing right now at the museum, is trying to figure out how many bat species are actually in African countries. So for example, Kenya, how many bat species are there? We're discovering new species almost every time we're working on them. So that's actually a pending question because we're trying to figure that out. But you will see more concentration of bat species near the tropics.
Okay, so where it's warmer and closer to the equator?
Yes, exactly. And what was the other part of the question? Where do they live?
Yeah, because bats seem to live almost everywhere.
They do. They live almost everywhere except Antarctica. So then you can find them everywhere else.
Pretty cold in Antarctica.
Yeah.
Question regarding how many bats have you ever seen?
Wow, that's a really good question. Since I started working with bats, I would have to say, maybe like in the 3-digit, maybe like, let's say like above 1,000 maybe.
Wow. Well, I mean, if you count the ones in the collection, I don't know.
Oh, I thought you meant like the ones that I've captured.
Well, and that's, I feel like there's a lot of different ways to measure it. So you've like captured and handled like hundreds and hundreds of bats?
Yes.
It's a lot of bats right there.
I know.
That's amazing. Elijah wanted to know how many bats are in a group of families.
That's a good question. It actually depends on the species.
Mm.
And it's something that scientists have studied a lot. So let's take the little Honduran white bat that I showed you in the tent. Um, they can have a varying number of bats within a tent, but it'll mostly be a male with females surrounding them. I think it can go up to 6, but it really depends on the species because if not, you can have thousands of bats in one cave.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's, and with 1,400 different types of bats, I'm sure there's just as many different numbers of group sizes.
Definitely, definitely. Some are actually solitary.
That's fun. Ryan was wondering, at what age do bats learn to fly?
That also depends on the species, but again, good question. So, depending on what the habits are when it comes to pup care, is when the bat is going to start flying. So, that could be anywhere between a couple of months, let's say, because if not, they're always attached to the mother. If the mother has to go out looking for food, sometimes you'll catch a mother and the pup will be attached to the nipple and it just won't leave. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. So like mom has to fly while like literally carrying the weight of
Has to
children.
fly with extra weight. Yeah.
That's some super mom power right there.
Mm-hmm.
Mirabelle would like to know if bats can swim.
So some bats have been seen to not dive into the water, but if they fall into the water, they can get out. But I don't think it's an activity that they actually want to do.
Yeah, it seems tricky because that's, and I have a question myself now about how do bats drink water?
So they'll fly over the body of water and then they'll just open up their mouth.
That sounds hilariously fun. Just like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
oh my gosh, that would be a really difficult way if we had to like.
Ooh, imagine. Ooh, wait, Anna, I can't hear you.
I don't know why I muted myself.
There we go. Yeah.
Henry would like to know if all bats have fangs or sharp teeth.
So they're all gonna have a different number of teeth, but when it comes to fangs, so you mean the incisors that are gonna help penetrate like cowhide and stuff like that, they're going to be more pronounced in blood-eating bats than, for example, nectar-feeding bats that actually don't have those because they don't need them. So it's going to depend also on the species that we're talking about.
That makes sense. Like with a lot of animals, you have different teeth for different types of foods.
Exactly.
Tessa would like to know more about how echolocation works.
Great. So echolocation is going to be a high frequency sound that we can't hear, but that bats can hear because they have such amazing hearing. And what they'll do is that they'll kind of emit that sound. So like, let's say like a little scream, and it's going to bounce off of an object, let's say a moth or a tree, or maybe another bat. It'll bounce off of that object and return to the bat. So they can tell how far away it is, how big it is, and where it's going.
That's really cool. And is it true that like some of the different shapes of bat noses and ears, the noses help them to like broadcast their sound, and then their ears are specialized to help them hear better?
Yes.
I do really love the funky bat noses. They entertain me a
So
lot.
cute.
They are really cute.
There are some that are like this big.
That is awesome.
I think I included a picture when I was talking about the two groups.
Yeah, there's some good noses. Um, Why do bats sleep upside down?
Oh, okay. So that actually comes down to evolution, but let's say it's easier to start flying if you're already being influenced by gravity.
Oh, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You can just let go and be flying.
Exactly.
Also, I feel like it'd be very hard to stand on the ground as a bat. They're like not very,
Yeah, because their claws are modified to hang.
yeah, they're pretty silly. We have time for one more question, and this one is about
Okay.
you. How long did you study, or how many classes did you take to become an expert about bats?
Whew, a lot. So I did my undergrad and I started working with bats in 2009.
Okay, so it's been
Yeah.
7 years.
Yeah, it's been a long time. And then I got involved in a lot of bat conservation groups and we would hold workshops and I took a lot of mammalogy courses. I did my undergrad thesis on bats. Hopefully next year we can start my PhD and it'll also be focused on bats. So yeah, it's been a long time.
That's awesome. Well, it seems like you have gathered so much awesome bat information, and thank you for sharing all of that with us today.
Of course.
There are a lot of miscellaneous bat questions, so we can write up more of those answers about bat boxes and beyond, and those will be sent out to you later. But thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Stefania, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.